Eric Garner, Sean Bell, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, Dan Roy Henry.
Hello, everyone. We're getting ready to get started. First, I'd like to start off with 8 seconds of silence for George Floyd, starting now. Thank you. I'd like to thank you guys for coming. You guys being here, shows that you care for what happens in your community and you care about Black lives, so I appreciate that. Just a little introduction about myself. For those who don't know me, I'm Jordan Ward. I was raised in the Hueneme, Oxnard area. Graduated from Hueneme High School. Then further my education, I went to Oxnard College and transferred out with an AA degree. From there, I went to Cal State Channel Islands, where I received a bachelor's in psychology. And 2 years ago, just recently got my master's degree in educational counseling. Thank you. Thank you. So this event got started, me and Dexter and a friend, Denise, she's not here today. We had started a walk for Ahmaud Arbery, May 9th on Victoria. It was very peaceful. And then I got a call from my buddy Tamar. Tamar, where are you at? There you are, that's Tamar Lee. He helped me organize the event. He said, you know what, next time you do something, I want to be a part of it. And a little over 2 weeks after George Floyd passed, just like everyone in the world, I was very, very sad, down and out, but I couldn't just let this be a norm anymore. I couldn't be in my room and just say, like, this is what life has to be. So then immediately I hit up Tamar. I said, hey, I have this idea. Let's bring the community together. After that, I hit Dexter. He's well in the streets with Hip Hop Help. And then I hit up my buddy Micah. I said, hey, I want to put this together. So now I was just frustrated and fed up. And I couldn't accept this as my reality. I kept thinking about my oldest memory as a child is seeing Rodney King get beat by police officers. He made it out alive. Now I have children, I'm a father of 2, and now they are witnessing the same things that I witnessed. And that just kills me to my core, that they have to grow up in that world. I can't let that be a part of my children's reality. So the 3 main reasons why I organized the event, for one, is to bring awareness to the community and bring us all together. 2, to hold the police officers accountable for their actions. And 3, come up with preventative measures so that the youth in our community does not have to grow with this. It doesn't have to grow up with this being a norm. My son is 11 and my daughter is 9. They're both growing rapidly. I do not wish for them to fear the police. I would like for them to look at them as allies, someone they can run to. So this is why we put this event together. So I wanted to give you guys an idea of what you see the itinerary. Each speaker here on the panel is going to speak for about 15 minutes each. And then we have 2 community guest speakers, and then we'll open it up to for Q&A. I will let everyone know, you keep your hands raised. My team will come and grab you, and you'll assemble yourself this way, and the mic is right here. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dexter of Hip Hop Help.
I look at the world as 40-40-20. I always have, ever since I was able to, starting in around high school. And what that means is the world is, in my eyes, has always been 40% bad, 40% good, and 20% undecided. And those two 40% spend their time trying to influence, encourage, persuade the undecided 20%. And that's just the way I look at things. And my prayer that I've always prayed for is, if not me, then hopefully my children, or your children will live to see a moment where the world is 51% good. My name is Dexter. I'm the president of an organization called Hip Hop Help. And what we do is we help people with food, rent, utility assistance by putting on hip hop events, receiving donations, and sponsorship. We've been doing this for the past 5 years within the community and testing it in other areas. We also have a youth program where we teach kids on the culture of hip hop in areas of dance, MC, DJing, and the arts. And that program is it's a spinoff from one of our 805 greats, his platform, Mr. D Tragic, of the 5 Elements of Hip Hop. Racism and police brutality has been around for decades. About 20 years ago, I used to coach basketball in Camarillo, and I did that for like 4 years. And all 4 years, I experienced some form of racism. And I would take, when we would do our end of year banquets, I would take a few minutes and always talk to the parents and the kids about the origin of racism and where it comes from and how it starts. And you can tell some of the parents get uncomfortable when I tell them that it comes from the house. So at that age, we're teaching 12 and 13-year-old kids. So one day, I don't know if it was practice or getting ready for a game, but one of my players came to me and said that his friends at school today asked him, "How can you play for a black guy?" Needless to say, I kind of used that phrase to kind of motivate my team. And that year that happened, we were in the playoff. We was in the championship. And I kind of turned up my basketball knowledge. I used to play basketball. So I went into coaching the league, and it was more about, just giving the kids some fundamentals and things like that. But when that came to me about how can you play for a black guy, I said, well, let me turn up the black guy knowledge. So we're in the championship game, and I'll never forget this. Player name was Chris, and he stole the ball from the other team. He's going down for a layup, and keep in mind, we're talking about 12 and 13-year-olds. So he stole the ball, he's going down for a layup, and the other kid runs down behind him and elbows him in the back of the head. And Chris, now at 12 and 13, you probably think that's retaliation time. But Chris got up looked over at me for direction on what to do. And I said, go to the free throw line. So Chris went to the free throw line. He hit the first free throw. And of course, because I was the only black guy in the league, I think there was one, mixed race kid, but that was it. And that day it felt like the whole city had came to watch us lose. And once Chris sank the first one, and there was a pause in between that, and before he shot the second one, I looked over at the coach on the other side, because there was no discipline from him when his player did that. So I looked over at him and I said, this is what you teaching them kids? And then I looked at Chris, because I wanted to defeat racism so bad that day. So I looked at Chris and I said, hey, shoot these with your eyes closed. But I have faith. So Chris closed his eyes, sank those free throws, and we won that championship. We defeated racism that day. And then I start looking, I'm like, man, this is a city that has a church on almost every corner. What in the world is happening inside the church that these kids are not learning that this is not cool? Another testimony. My lady and I are sitting outside in Camarillo, eating lunch at El Rey's, right there on the boulevard. And a truck sitting at the light across the street, and we're sitting there eating. And the truck is sitting there, and the light turns green. 2 white kids mash the gas and say, nigger. So my lady said, did you hear what they said? And I pretended like I didn't hear it, so that I wouldn't let that mess up our lunch date, but I heard it. And it took me back again to all those churches in Camarillo. I don't know what they're teaching them. The reason I'm sharing these stories with you is because those kids at 12 and 13, because of the generational setup by the parents before them, those kids grow up to be lawyers, police officers, and even presidents. March 20th, 2017, Donald Trump held a rally in Louisville, Kentucky, and this is the day that he decided to try and bury Colin Kaepernick for peacefully protesting police brutality. Trump changed the narrative to disrespecting the flag, all while boasting and bragging and lying to America. The Dallas Cowboys owner, Jerry Jones, stated in his deposition that Trump told him the NFL protests were a very winning, strong issue for me. Tell everybody he can't win this one. This one lifts me. Just in case y'all thought that protesting was about disrespecting the flag. July 2017, the White House spokeswoman Sarah Huckabee Sanders said President Trump was probably making a joke last week when he encouraged police officers to be tougher when making arrests. This is the President of the United States. And in order for her to say he was probably joking, that means he said it. New York Police Department Commissioner James O'Neill said, to suggest that police officers apply any standard in this use of force other than what is reasonable and necessary is irresponsible. So it seems like people know what he says is irresponsible, but they still let him say it. And he still has supporters that let him say it. Let's fast forward to yesterday. June 12th, statement from the president. We have to respect our police. We have to take care of our police. They're protecting us. Remember, they're protecting us, because I'm going to tell you something in a minute. And if they're allowed to do their jobs, they'll do their jobs great, Trump said. And you always have a bad apple. No matter where you go, you have a bad apple, and there's not too many of them. Now remember, they're protecting us. To protect and to serve, the creed stamped across millions of police cars throughout the United States. This motto is consistent with the common belief that police officers, as well as other law enforcement officers, are here to protect us. After all, we are all taught to dial 911 when we need help. Subject to narrow exceptions, the United States Constitution does not require law enforcement officers to protect you from other people, according to the U.S. Supreme Court. This notion contradicts our ingrained perception, but it is still the law. January 2019, a law went into effect for the state of California called the SB 1421 that says California Police Department must disclose all police misconduct records subject to disclosure under Senate Bill 1421 in areas of A, records relating to the report, investigation, or findings of an incident regarding an officer-involved shooting or an incident involved the use of force by an officer resulting in death or great bodily injury. B, records relating to an incident involving a sustained finding of sexual assault by an officer involving a member of the public. C, records related to an incident involving a sustained finding of dishonesty by an officer directly related to the reporting, investigation, or prosecution of a crime, or an investigation of misconduct by another officer. So what that is that's the law. And the law says that if an officer is involved in those things I just read to you, then it's the law that if the media contacts them requesting previous history, they should turn it over. An article published in the Ventura County Star back in February 2019 says, aside from Santa Paula Police, Ventura County law enforcement agencies are not completing requests for officers' personal records predating 2019 until a high court clarifies the scope of the new law, making them no longer confidential. So we're having this sit down because of everything that's happening, regardless of how it got sparked, regardless of what caused it, but now we're here and we have to do something. And we weren't just gonna, the organizers of tomorrow, Jordan, myself, and Ross, we weren't just gonna bring people together and have dialogue. There's an ask from this group of people. And I have confidence in the Oxnard Police Department that we can get an answer at some point. Doesn't have to be today, but we need to work towards something that we can both, the community and the Oxnard PD, showing good faith. So we don't know where Oxnard PD stands to date with this, but we feel that this would be a huge step in the right direction of accountability and good faith to the community if Oxnard Police complied with the law. We feel that an officer is less likely to engage in reckless behavior if he or she knows his prior history will be released to the public. The organizers of this event would like to follow up with Oxnard PD in upcoming weeks to hopefully be able to get something in place to deliver to the community. So this is our ask today from the community. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you, Dexter. I will now pass it to Alex Nguyen, City Manager.
Thank you, and good afternoon. First, thank you for organizing this conversation, and thank you for including us. I only have 15 minutes, which for me is not a lot of time, and there are so many things that I can speak on. There's so many angles and so many layers in history of these issues. But I do have a few slides I'm going to use, if I can get this to work. There we go. So I'm going to go over two areas today in the brief time that I have. I want to share my personal, not necessarily my personal experience, but just my particular take on this moment. And then, of course, it's important that I share with you what my responsibility is as your city manager. But obviously, who I am as a person informs how I am as a city manager. It's been a long time since I've had to have a conversation about race and injustice and police brutality inside a church. I used to have to do this a lot when I worked in Oakland. So I have to be mindful to watch my language. Also, because when I have to talk about these issues, I tend to want to use very colorful language. So please pardon me if I better not slip into church though. But so, as a young boy, I was fortunate enough to come to this country. My family were wartime refugees, and after a very brief time in a handful of refugee camps, we resettled in Virginia at the end of 1975. And in the 1970s, Virginia was very much the South. So I grew up there up until I escaped to go to college. And without really having the ability to understand or the awareness to appreciate what Virginia was teaching me, it taught me a lot. And I, of course, as a young and older adult later, it was very evident. And I was not the model minority. I was not to succeed. In fact, what Virginia taught me was I was inferior, with the random exception of when some kid had a math problem. So believe it or not, being foolish, I rebelled by purposely failing math. And I think about Virginia in that era, and I always want to think that it's gotten better. But then 2017 happened in the heart of Virginia, in Charlottesville. This time without white hoods. 2017. So this slide I have up here obviously is a metaphor. And it's just who's at the top of the iceberg this time. Because no matter what we do, given this country's history, I guarantee you someone's going to replace his name at the top. So it's a metaphor. I think it's pretty easy. But let's not just look at names. Let's look at faces. And this is where I want to share my take about what's been happening this time. And what's frustrating to me is as I look across the nation and I see the headlines and I read what our national leaders are saying, my frustration is that we continue to want to look away. We still want to look away, even though this tool has made it harder to look away. But we want to look away. And it's evidence when our reaction is, well, why are they looting? That's not the problem. Why are they protesting? That's not the problem. And even when leaders refer to what happened to George Floyd as saying the death of George Floyd didn't die. It's not the death of George Floyd, it's the murder of George Floyd. So in times like these, words really do matter and really reveal what people really want to do versus to continue to find nice ways to look away. And our leaders say, well, this is terrible, it's tragic, and we're ready to listen, we're ready to learn. I'm sorry, what part of history do you need to learn from? What decade, what year? What lessons do you need to learn? When you see what happens, even if you don't have a single black friend, even if you've never broken bread with a black family, what lessons can black people teach you to convince you that it's just wrong? Now, I'm speaking about people of my generation and older. I understand for the youth and younger generations, they have every right to ask anything of this world. But those of us who've lived on this planet for more than 40 years, not so easy. So I ask, what do you want to learn that will convince you that what happened is simply wrong? How many books have to be written? How many poems have to be written? How many songs have to be written to get the message across? So when I hear our national leaders say we want to listen and we want to learn, what I hear is it's a nice way to look away. Nobody wants to look at this. I'm very unhappy about all those platitudes, and I'm really unhappy about the politics of symbolism. How many more symbols do we need to teach us? How many Martin Luther King speeches does one need to read? How many Rosa Parks do we need? How many Malcolms do we need? Look at this. You can find tens of thousands of images and news stories. What do we need to learn? What do we need to learn to just all agree that it's wrong? This is a very famous image from probably 90 years ago. And it explains a lot about why it continues. Now it's uncomfortable to see the video of what happened to Mr. Floyd. It's uncomfortable. But it wasn't very long ago that was amusement. And if you don't recognize this picture, it's a typical image from a lynching. And just don't look away, though, because look at those expressions. What do we need to learn today? Turned into a powerful mural that was very controversial in an attempt to teach. This is such a great message about not looking away. I'm so frustrated when I hear people say, we want to listen. Well, clearly you have not been listening for a long, long time. And this is also something that frustrates me to no end. Now you want to take a knee? Oh, and it's not enough to take a knee, you've got to put on an African kente cloth? What does that mean? What are you saying? It's another form of looking away. The way I feel now I won't take a knee because I'm not going to pander. It's a little too late for that. So I'm going to leave it here for the remainder of my comments. Now, obviously, as a nation, we've made tremendous progress. There's no question about that. And that's still one of the things that makes this country unique in the world. But as this continues to happen, I begin to wonder if the progress is really through exceptions rather than establishing the average norm or the rule. I know for a fact I'm an exception. You're not going to find many city managers in this state or in this country that look like me. If my high school teachers found out that I grew up to become a city manager, they'd probably have a heart attack. Kind of makes me want to call them. And the problem with wanting to look away is we continue to ask the black community to be at the forefront. We continue to ask the black community to teach us why it's wrong. We continue to expect them to lead the conversation. But they've been doing it for hundreds of years. So what does it mean for me as an Asian American, but also now as a city manager and serving this city? It means that I have to be part of the broader solutions here in Oxnard. That I have to be responsible and accountable for what we do next. And that I have to hold our police department accountable. Now, the good news is I have experience. I lived in Oakland for 20 years, and I worked in the city attorney's office for 11 years. And during my time there, I had to deal with a lot of bad police cases. The most infamous one being the Riders, a group of 4 officers. They called themselves the Riders. They were taking young black and brown men across the tracks in West Oakland, torturing them, planting evidence on them, and arresting them. But you know what blew the whistle on them? A good cop. A good cop turned them in. And yes, it was a white cop who turned them in. And the city attorney at the time, to his credit, after evaluating the facts of the case, immediately said, I'll defend the city because I have to, but I will not defend these police officers. And given the history of the Oakland Police Department, that case was the catalyst that led to a federal consent decree. The feds ran that department for a decade. Unfortunately, not really solving very much. When I was an assistant city manager in Riverside, I supervised the management of the Citizens Police Review Board. So I have a lot of experience with working to make police departments better. And I'm very grateful for the police department that I found here in Oxnard when I came here 2 years ago. I have absolute confidence in Police Chief Whitney, our assistant chiefs, Chief Sonstegard and Chief Benitez. I have absolute confidence in them to continue to do the right thing. We will improve our department in the Oxnard context. We're not going to have knee-jerk reactions based on the Minneapolis context or the LA context or the Oakland context. We need to do this together in the Oxnard context. And when I talk about not looking away, obviously police departments across the nation cannot look away from this moment. But the rest of us, if we only look at police, then we're still looking away. It isn't the police for generations that have told the banks not to give loans to people of color. It isn't the police over the generations that have told landlords not to rent to black folk. It isn't police that have told education institutions to bottom out kids of color. It isn't the police that have told the insurance companies to redline poor neighborhoods or black neighborhoods. So if we only look at police, then we're still looking away. There's some stark contrasts that have in our society that clearly have nothing to do with police. You have a white woman who spends hundreds of thousands of dollars bribing her kids into her fancy school. She's sentenced to 14 days. You have a black woman who lies about her zip code just to get her kids into a better public school. We sentence her to 5 years. You have white kids overdosing on opioids and you call it a crisis, but when you had black kids overdosing on crack, you called it a crime. So what more do we have to learn? So we'll continue the work here in Oxnard. And the moment is focused on policing, and we're not shying away from that. But I'm also not going to let people look away. I think my time's up.
Thank you, Alex Nguyen. I appreciate those words. We're going to take a brief 5-minute break. Just 5 minutes.
And it's so sad to see my skin color isn't a reason to point your gat at me. Wow, sad times that we live in still. Another kill like the modern day Emmett Till. What are you supposed to do when folks come after you? To hunt you down and leave you slain like an animal. God forgive me, cause I'm really getting tired. Makes me wanna strike back like a 9 for a 9. I'm seeing mothers cry and seeing brothers die. If I said it didn't affect me, then I'll be telling a lie. Just another day driving home from work. Cops get behind me, now my heart beating out my shirt.
Please do not leave. We have a special speaker coming. Please do not leave. Just 5 minutes.
Enough is enough. Enough is enough. I'm sick and tired of seeing the same thing. Enough is enough. The news channels put us all in the box, like we all the same news flash. No, we not. Generalizations get innocent people shot. Citizens arrest for jogging around my block, huh? Tell me, doesn't seem fair to y'all? It's like they got more compassion for whales and dogs. The cops knew the story, they just chose to ignore it till it hit social media and we seen the recording. Kaepernick, Neil, people seem so upset. George Floyd got killed with a knee on his neck. How we supposed to feel when we see no respect? Like it ain't a big deal when they feel no regrets. I'm seeing people who just remain silent and only speak out when they criticizing the riots. Let me paint this picture for those that can't get it. Tell me, can I kill your son and just get away with it? Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. I'm sick and tired of seeing the same thing. Enough is enough. I'm paying attention to certain companies. Some I know that'll never get a crumb from me. Don't wanna hire no black scholars, but they marketing to us, trying to get our black dollars. Rich millionaires, yeah, we quick to buy our clothes from them. Tragedy strikes, can't even get a quote from them. They can't even say I'm praying for y'all, but we love to wear they brand, so we stay in the mall. Giving away our power to the guys who's rich. Malcolm X and Martin Luther didn't die for this. You see me as a black man instead of a person. If one of us gets shot, you like you must have deserved it. And even in my background, gotta be perfect. But once a life is taken, you cannot reverse it. It's somebody's son, somebody's father, somebody's husband. Why are you not enough is enough? Come on. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. I'm sick and tired of seeing the same thing. Enough is enough. Rest in peace to Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Philando Castile, Terrence Crutcher, Sandra Bland, Eric Garner, Sean Bell, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, Dan Roy Henry.
Anyone who knew him, Ahmaud Arbery, loved to run.
Unless it was pouring rain down outside, Ahmaud was going to be running.
But somehow, on a sunny Sunday in a coastal Georgia community, Arbery's run became a deadly chase.
Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. I'm sick and tired of seeing the same thing. Enough is enough. Sitting here shaking my head at the news, knowing it could have been me joking in that brother's shoes. Man, it got me losing my sanity. Like when I leave home, will I make it back to my family? Another casualty, and it's so sad to see my skin color is enough reason to point your gat at me. Wow, sad times that we live in still. Another kill like the modern day Emmett Till. What are you supposed to do when folks come after you? To hunt you down and leave you slain like an animal. God forgive me, cause I'm really getting tired. Makes me wanna strike back like a 9 for a 9. I'm seeing mothers cry and seeing brothers die. If I said it didn't affect me, then I'll be telling a lie. Just another day driving home from work. Cops get behind me, now my heart beating out my shirt. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. I'm sick and tired of seeing the same thing. Enough is enough. The news channels put us all in the box, like we all the same news flash. No, we not. Generalizations get innocent people shot. Citizens arrest for jogging around my block, huh? Tell me, doesn't seem fair to y'all? It's like they got more compassion for whales and dogs. The cops knew the story, they just chose to ignore it till it hit social media and we seen the recording. Kaepernick, Neil, people seem so upset. George Floyd got killed with a knee on his neck. How we supposed to feel when we see no respect, like it ain't a big deal when they feel no regrets. I'm seeing people who just remain silent and only speak out when they criticizing the riots. Let me paint this picture for those that can't get it. Tell me, can I kill your son and just get away with it? Enough is enough.
We need the chief up there, though. Okay, right?
Enough is enough.
I'll wait until he gets close to them.
Enough is enough. Enough is enough.
Hello, everyone. We have a special guest speaker. It wasn't in the itinerary, however, he came and blessed us with his presence. So, the cousin of George Floyd is here to speak, Quentin Floyd.
Hey, how you guys doing? Thank you guys for being here. I'm in a rush because I'm actually at work, and I took a break. And I just want to thank you guys. I can't breathe. I didn't know George. I never had a chance to meet him. I'll never get that chance. I found out about this whole situation probably the same way you did. My mother-in-law texted me and asked me, was I related to George Floyd? I probably wore this name tattooed on my arm. I said, I don't know, I'll find out. I didn't know what she was talking about. I go to Instagram and your Instagram page. It said, Justice for George Floyd. I've never met you, Fonte, but I've seen all the stuff you do in the community, with the kids, the sports, the health, the fitness. So I've always been connected with this brother, and then to see that post, and then just a few moments of research, a few phone calls, a few emails, you find out you're blood related. But I knew it when I saw his face. We got the same lips, we got the same nose. My son has that nose, my son has those lips, my daughter has it. And George's life is ended. And everyone asked me, how do you feel? It's eerie because I didn't know him, but it feels like the same feeling I felt when I found out about Kobe Bryant and Gigi Bryant that morning, but it's way more personal. And I've had to have conversations with my white daughter about why George Floyd died. Conversations with my Chinese daughter about why George Floyd died. Conversations with my Puerto Rican son and my Puerto Rican daughter. Woo! Shit. And I shouldn't have to do that. But I do. It's not right. And I thank you guys. So much is going to come out of this in a positive light. I will be the voice for my family. I will be the voice for this community. I will unify Oxnard. And wherever I rest, it will be unified. Yeah, I see color. I know it exists. But it's just unity, people. Just take 1 second. Let me show you how unity works. When I say George, you say Floyd. George. Floyd. Loud, like you mean it. George. Floyd. We just unified in 2 seconds. We unified to say a name in 2 seconds. So we got to get it together, man. Dexter, I love you. And I thank you so much. Jordan, I love you too, man. And I'll see you guys. I can't breathe.
Thank you. Thank you, Quentin. I will now like to turn it over to the Chief of Police, Chief Whitney.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. I have a pinched nerve in my neck, so I can only sit down for so long, so I appreciate the opportunity to stand. I want to start by thanking the organizers of this event for making this happen. Appreciate the opportunity to speak on this important topic. Also want to thank Calvary Chapel, Pastor Lance Ralston, the deacons of the church, and most importantly, all of you for being here. The last few weeks, I've been looking forward to having a conversation. Several people asked me during the protests, what are you going to do? And the reality is the first thing for police department, we have to get through those. Have to get through those. I'm looking forward to having these conversations. Look around the room. I know a lot of you, but not everybody. I feel like I need to do some explaining about our department. So I'm going to probably spend, for those of you that know me, that know us, you've already heard some of this. My fundamental guiding principle as the chief, though, is that the police department can never be divided against the community. We can never allow this to turn into an us versus them dynamic. And everything that I've done since becoming chief in 2016 has been to try to bring our police department and our community closer together. The actions by the former police officers that killed George Floyd cannot be tolerated. They cannot be defended. Our entire nation was affected, and we would not have these nationwide protests as civil unrest if there weren't true problems. There are 18,000 about law enforcement agencies in the country. I can't speak for the rest of them, but I can speak for the Oxnard Police Department. I can tell you that the images, the actions that you saw on television do not represent the Oxnard Police Department. Before I go too far into the comments, I do want to acknowledge what my boss, the city manager, had said. The depth of his comments is to be acknowledged and admired. It's a hard man to follow. I was a good student in high school, went to the public schools here in Oxnard, good student in college, got a master's degree, went through the police academy. I'd never once heard of what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921. I never heard the term institutional racism till I was 40 years old. When you're 40 years old, it's not easy to change people, right? Or older. Probably took me about a year to soften up to that idea. My understanding about Jim Crow laws, segregated housing, segregated schooling was very limited. Many of us can graduate from high school, college, start our careers, start our families with very limited knowledge, very limited understanding of our country's struggles with racial equality and black oppression. And I say this because I think that there are many well-meaning people that want to help make things better. They don't know what to do. I hope that we're at a point nationally where our country can make progress on the racial inequities. And those of you that know me know that I stand with the black community. Our police department stands with the black community. We stand against racial injustices. We stand against systemic racism. And most importantly, we stand against police brutality. I am and have always been willing to work with any individual, any group that wants to make things better in the city of Oxnard, that wants to make things safer in the city of Oxnard. Always willing to reassess, to reflect on how we do things. Throughout my career, 30 plus years in the department, I've done the best I could to make positive change within the department. When I became chief, our police department developed clear goals on what we wanted to achieve. These were 3 of the 4. This isn't the topic. None of these are the topic for the day, so I'm not going to talk about those. But the 4th one was to improve trust and respect through community engagement. I'll say this a few times today. We hire really good people. We hire people from within our community. And I feel strongly that when our officers and our community members meet and interact, it's always a good thing. Some guiding principles behind this community engagement. We're going to establish ourselves as part of the community, whether it's churches, Little League, schools, whatever the organization. If we get an invitation, we'll show up. We'll be part of it. We will listen and we'll work together. We've all heard a lot of words, a lot of fancy words. Sounds good. See it on TV, read it in the newspaper. That's easy to talk. We have a history of change. I believe it's important to provide opportunities for non-confrontational contacts between our officers and our residents. Because most patrol officers, they go from one call to the next. And most people don't call 911 when they're having a good day. So they go from one negative contact to the next. So as bosses, as leaders in the department, we need to create opportunities for non-confrontational contacts. And I'll talk about some of those. Jason Benitez, assistant chief, was the one that first stated this. We need to recognize that every single contact we have with our community is an opportunity to make a positive investment. In the early 2000s, I went up to a training. It was on disproportionate minority contacts. It was up in Portland, Oregon. It was the one white male in the class, the one police officer that was in the class. Mostly everybody else was a social worker. There's a lot of discussion about what the police should do. And one thing that resonated with me, and it's been almost 20 years, I can't remember what I did yesterday, but I remember this. She said, sometimes when we call 911, we just want somebody to show up that can be a mentor, that can provide guidance. You don't always have to enforce the law. Another one of our guiding principles, we have to recognize that we have special relationships. Our officers, there are special relationships. Whether it's the elderly, the homeless, those that do not speak English, those that are suffering from mental illness, our young people, people that do not trust us, that don't have respect, those are special opportunities for us. We're going to promote local hiring. I'll talk more about that. The second part about building trust and respect is you have to have high standards and you have to uphold them. You can't just go and have great relationships and think that that's going to smooth everything over. We have to be an accountable organization with high standards. I can tell you we have high expectations. We hold our employees accountable. We closely monitor use of force incidents with supervisor and management oversight. We investigate thoroughly citizen complaints. We conduct operational audits, and we do critical incident reviews. And I'll talk a little bit about that. In 2012, we had a terrible incident. Our officer shot an innocent person. Was caught in a crossfire. Officers were trying to do their job. They stopped rival gang members that were in a neighborhood likely looking to do a shooting. There was a standoff. Suspects ran. Officers were in foot pursuit. Suspects turned and fired at the officers. Very tough time for us. If you were here in 2012, you know the story. In our business, the way the system is set up, the local police department does the investigation, or the local sheriff's department does the investigation. And the reality in our business, if you don't trust the police, you're likely not going to trust the outcome of those investigations. We hired an independent outside investigative firm, does a lot of work in LA, very respected, issued a long report. There's just a couple comments that I want to read from that report. Partly because I feel like some people don't know our history. Some people don't know what we're trying to achieve. These are taken out of the report. Speaking from experience of having worked with numerous agencies on similar events, we found much to admire in OPD's internal responses. Most importantly, the department improved its policies to provide additional guidance and performance expectations. In our view, the depth and thoughtfulness of the Oxnard Police Department process could well serve as a paradigm for other law enforcement agencies. And I don't say that to try to brag, or it may come across as being defensive. I say that to try to communicate with all of you that when we make mistakes, we try to learn from them and we try to be better. And as I mentioned earlier, it's one thing to say the right words. I like to see what people do and what they've done. And I want to talk about some of the positive changes we've made within the Oxnard Police Department. That top one, crisis intervention training, that goes all the way back almost 20 years now. We learned that when you have a person in crisis, suffers from a mental illness, and in possession of a weapon, those are tough situations. We knew that we had to improve our training. There wasn't a lot out there. I actually went to a class in San Jose. It was a CIT, Crisis Intervention Training. It's based on a Memphis model. Brought it back to the department. We worked in the county, and we're much better now in our city and in our county with handling these types of situations than we were back then. And these are first-person accounts. There are plenty of other positive changes within the department. Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, JDAI. It was in 2006. I heard about that within the county. And I was interested. I wanted to look into it. Our juvenile facility in Ventura County was built for 400 juveniles. 400. This JDAI effort was an effort to incarcerate fewer kids, fewer of our kids, fewer juveniles. I participated on this group, and we stopped sending. Oxnard was the biggest department. We sent the most kids to the juvenile facility. We stopped sending so many kids to the juvenile facility. That facility that was built for 400 kids has an average daily population in the mid-80s. That third one, new understanding with our schools. Some people that want police reform want to pull officers out of schools because there is a tendency when you have police officers in schools, what do? They enforce the law. Sometimes you can have more arrests of students. We recognized that in 2008. We're the ones that initiated this through no prompting of anybody. This was us monitoring what was happening at the national level. We initiated it with the school district. We said we're not going to criminalize school misconduct. We stopped arresting kids for school misconduct. Those are all of these I think every one of these changes on here, nobody knows about, nobody hears about. Those are internal changes that we're making to try to be a more responsive police department. Cultural proficiency training. We started doing that in 2009. For 4 years, we trained everybody in the police department. Again, it's not sexy. People are not interested, but it was important to do. Definitely expanded my base, moved me further along on the cultural proficiency continuum. I believed it moved our department further along on the continuum. Just in the interest of time, I'll speed up a little bit. We'll talk about that top one. Friday, we had 800 protesters. Ended up at Plaza Park, marched, stopped, took a knee in front of our station for 8.5 minutes. Started at Wilson Park, organized by 16-year-old kids. That was beautiful. We love seeing that. Wednesday before that, 400 people out in front of our station, yelling at our officers, pigs. I won't say all the other words. Not so beautiful, a lot of hate there. I don't think that's the answer. I know that's not the answer. But for both of those protests, you didn't see any of our police officers. You compare us to some of the other cities you saw on television. We had 800 protesters. You didn't see any officers. We're going to protect free speech. We want people to do that. Audio recording, body-worn cameras, we were again, this isn't a competition, but we were ahead on those. I want to talk a little bit about our community engagement efforts. And I say this and I appreciate your patience because it is easy to use words. Again, I'll say it's easy to say and sound impressive. In our business, my job is to get things done. And I just want to share some of the things that we're doing. 2016, we doubled down on our community engagement efforts. Several things, we call them community check-ins, community conversations. I would consider this a community conversation. Community check-ins, we go when there's a traumatic event in the city. We go, we connect, we see how the neighborhoods are doing. Park Walk and Talk, another initiative we started. I walk with several of our officers, several of our community members. Few of you in this room have gone with me. Alex has gone with me. Usually we walk in the neighborhoods that have the highest density housing. And there's a popular effort now to defund police. And I will tell you, we do not have there's nothing personal in it for us as far as trying to protect our budget. We're always going to be great team players. And if our budget is smaller, we're going to do the best we can with what we have. I promise you that. But I can also tell you that every one of those neighborhoods, when we talk to people, we talk to regular people, not activists, regular people in the neighborhoods that are having the biggest impact from crime in our city. Everybody that has gone with me will say the same thing. Every one of these neighborhoods, whether it's Lemonwood, Mariposa and Azalea, Colonia, Cuesta del Mar, they want more police officers. If they were afraid of us, they would not be asking for more police officers. That does not mean that we are perfect. Does not mean that we do not have issues. We do. Just saying that to try to make a point. What you see on television is not the Oxnard Police Department at this time. Another one of our initiatives, we want to focus in and have events at our station. And there's a reason for that. Particularly young people, we don't want them to look at our police station as the only time they go there is for something negative. We do very simple things. Our car show, our Halloween Spooktacular, our Santa at the station. It's an opportunity to have a lot of positive contacts with thousands of people in a relatively short amount of time. Same thing applies to our Coffee with the Cop, our neighborhood councils. Every single elementary school that I get an invitation to, I go and talk to those kids because we want them to have a positive contact. Most of us, the average person, has 2 contacts with police officers in their entire lives, and that forms their opinions on how they look at police officers. My son's actually only 17 years old. He's above average. He's had 3 contacts with police officers. And I asked him, how many of those 3 did you feel like the officer showed respect, was respectful? He said 1. I said, tell me about your school teachers. How many of those do you think are respectful? He said about the same percentage. I already talked about our vulnerable populations. We provided 2018, Assistant Chief Sonsegard provided the first in the county training for our officers, working with the LGBTQ community to try to get better. That was not prompted by anything that went wrong. It was an internal effort, trying to get better, trying to provide good service for our community. The Force Options Simulator. We know in our business when officers are put in a stressful situation, it's called decision making under stress. Your thinking brain isn't working as well. Your pupils dilate, your peripheral vision goes away, you get tunnel vision, the blood flow flows to your big muscles and away from your fine motor skills. So we do the best we can to put officers through these scenarios so that when they're placed in these situations in real life, they will make better decisions. Shortly after I got promoted to chief, one of my first community conversations was at Bethel AME Church. In addition to explain the goals that I already mentioned, I talked about a few guiding principles. Every neighborhood we go to, they generally want the same thing. They want us to keep their families safe. And I know that most people that have the same color skin I have, they don't question that. They know that the police are there to keep them safe. And I also know that people that have skin color that is darker than mine, they do question that. And I promise you, we're doing the best we can to close that gap. And we're always looking for partners. One of the things that I mentioned is that our police department needs to mirror our community. I grew up in Oxnard, went off to college. When I came, shortly after I graduated from college, came back, I became a police officer. And several times a week, I had contacts with people that I knew growing up. My older brother was also an officer. When people in the community recognize your name or your face for whatever reason, you went to high school with them, you played football, you played Little League baseball, you were in Cub Scouts with them, whatever. It's very simple, but it's also profound. They're less likely. You as an officer, am less likely to overreact. And it's the same on the other side. It's very basic. We have to hire people from within our community that mirrors our community. Ferguson is a perfect example of that when you look at the color of their residents and the color of their police officers. I could tell you they're going to have problems. Police officers have a very tough job. This is just last Sunday. Again, I want to share some background, some perspective. I think every one of these was down in South Oxnard. It's a little bit busier than a normal day, but not that much. Firearm arrest, shots fired, that led to a firearm arrest. I think that first one at 7:30, they were responding to a stabbing call. They get there, somebody ditched a gun. During that time, fireworks were going throughout the city. We were getting a ton of complaints about the fireworks. Alex and I were on a budget call, presentation for INCO. A couple of the callers wanted to defund the police. A couple talked about why we weren't doing more fireworks suppression. And one caller talked about we need to stop making so many arrests. The reason I point that out is because you cannot do all of those. Oftentimes, the police officers are stuck in the middle. We would love to get out of the business of policing nonviolent offenses or low-level offenses. Our residents, that is the most common complaint we get from our residents. Calls about homeless people, calls about fireworks. That's part of the conversation that we need to have. Do you want your police officers, our police department, to do that type of enforcement? Because oftentimes when you look at those bad outcomes throughout the country, it starts from a very low, minor crime. This just goes along with that, trying to share how busy Oxnard is. 861 violent felony crimes per year. That's the average. Good for us, it's gone down by 200 since 2016, but that is the average over the last 4 or 5 years. 539 calls last year, 2019, of suicidal persons. About 3,500 calls involving weapons. Very, 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 very few of those does anybody ever hear about, and they're handled peacefully because our officers are doing the best they can to give space, time, cover to minimize these types of calls. In one of my first community conversations, someone told me, raised his hand after and said, I've lived here in Oxnard for decades, and you guys have never once fired a police officer. I said, that's absolutely not the case. Since I became an assistant chief in 2006, I can tell you guys now, there's 18 officers that were either fired or they resigned in lieu of termination. And that's a surprise to most people. Those officers did not live up to our core values. They violated our policies. They violated the public's trust. But in the same way that we're stuck in the middle oftentimes between those that want us to enforce fireworks and those that do not want us to over-criminalize things, we also sometimes get stuck in the middle with California law and what we're allowed to release. Those 18 officers that were fired, as a department, we have to follow California law. And so most people didn't know about any of those 18. Dexter mentioned Senate Bill 1421. We have no problems. We're always going to follow the law. We have no problems releasing that information. I believe at the time, I don't remember that article, but shortly after it went into effect, there was a local Ventura County Superior Court decision saying that we could not, or it applied to the Sheriff's Department in our county, and we were advised that we would have to follow that court decision until it got worked out. Sometimes that happens. Since then, we've released many of these when the requests come in. We do have to follow the law, though, and sometimes these reports are thousands of pages, and sometimes, well, not sometimes, we have to redact the information on those. So we have no problems releasing that. I had a long and great relationship with John R. Hatcher III, and now with his daughter Regina as presidents of the NAACP. And I heard from both of them, problems we see elsewhere are not problems that we have in Oxnard. They got few complaints about misconduct about our police department. And I'm not saying this to counter what Dexter said. I believe his story, his testimony, and I say that you can actually have both that are true. You can have racism, you can have institutional racism, and still have what we deal with when we hear about a brutal culture. Both of those, and I say we do not have a brutal culture, both of those can be true. The reality is we get very, very few complaints of excessive force. Like I said earlier, I can only speak for the Oxnard Police Department. I cannot speak for the other 18,000 agencies, and I can tell you we do not have a culture of brutality within the Oxnard Police Department. Are we perfect? Absolutely not. We are not. But we are a learning organization. We provide the best service that we can. When we make mistakes, we're going to learn from them. As a boss, I'm not doing my job if I'm not looking to the future. Eric and Jason, they're not doing their job. I hope that when I pass my baton off to Jason, and I know it's going to happen, we're going to look at some of these things, and there will be others. But I believe one of the biggest challenges facing California right now, there's no safety net. I don't think the state lived up to its contract with the citizens when they said we're going to decriminalize some of these crimes, because what was explained is that there was going to be treatment instead of custody. And the treatment didn't come with it. In our city, we have about 85 people that suffer from a mental illness. They're drug dependent, they're homeless, and they're frequent offenders. They have frequent contacts with police. Takes up a lot of time, takes up a lot of resources. I would much rather have other alternatives than to use police resources for that. But cities don't have the ability to provide those resources. I talked already about reassessing on low-level offenses. For the most part, that's homeless, vagrancy issues, low-level drug offenses. It includes street vendors, fireworks. We need more instruction in the police academy on the history of police brutality, on racism, implicit bias, cultural proficiency. In our business, we need to change the focus from being law enforcers, law and order, and change the focus to where we see ourselves and the community sees us more as guardians, focusing on public safety, the safety of our residents, not necessarily enforcing every single law. I appreciate your patience. I believe I went over a bit. We are looking forward to hearing from the presenters. We come here today with an open heart, an open mind. I know that what I'm saying is my own perspective. It's essentially the perspective of the bosses within the police department. We hope to meet new partners going forward that want to continue to make our city better and our city safer. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Chief Whitney. I will now announce Ross Fonts.
Bring my mic, it's germ-free. Good afternoon, I'm Ross Fonts, community member. I work at Oxnard College. I decided I wanted to stand up. I got a bad back too, so I guess Scott and I both played football at Oxnard High, and we're both community guys. I remember playing football with Scott. He was a junior, I was a senior. He had a scholarship to Stanford, and he broke his leg. You remember that? And when I was at Ventura, he came to Ventura, and he started, and he said his leg was still hurting, and he was going to take the year off. And I would come up Victoria, head to football practice, and I would see Scott on the road selling flowers, right? So I used to make a little joke. He would have a little cast on his leg, and we would stop and make jokes of him and keep it pushing, right? And so I went to Ventura College and left there and went to UC Santa Barbara. Prior to that, prior to coming to Oxnard, I grew up in Compton, California with my mother, and then I came to Oxnard to be with Helene. Raise your hand, Helene. My mama, my second mama, Helene, and my dad. And before I get into what I feel about policing and Minneapolis and the spark that was there for change, my earliest experience with the police was in Compton in the, I would say, the mid-'70s when I was in elementary school. It was rumored, I can't really go into any detail, but there was somebody was saying that one of my brothers, my oldest brother, was selling guns. So I came home from school and they had the whole block taped off from one corner to the next corner. And so they let us in. They're asking who lives in this house, so they let us through on the tape. And I'm there, and the place is being swarmed with police officers. And mind you, at this time, we were in the 70s. I would say we were the proverbial latchkey kids. My mom worked at the oil plant in El Segundo, and then at nighttime she went to Cal State Dominguez. So we were kind of left to our own little vices for a number of hours during the week. And so I came home, and all these police officers are in our backyard, in the house, and I'm like, okay, well, what's going on, right? And, you know, I watched a little bit of television. I watched Beretta and Starsky and Hutch, all the cop shows. So I'm like, hey, man, these guys are running through my house, like, you know, just turning over stuff, digging up stuff in the backyard. And the first thing I said was, hey, and it was a black officer. I asked him, I said, hey, man, do you have a warrant? And he snatched me up. And then he grabbed me by the neck, and then he grabbed me and he told me I didn't have enough hair, you know where, to even ask him a question like that, right? So that was my early interaction with the police. I moved to Oxnard to come to high school. I didn't want to. That was Pop's idea, right? So my oldest brother came to Ventura, went to Ventura College, and then he graduated and went to USC to play football. And my dad's thing was that he wanted us to be here so at least we could finish high school. And so he would come down to Compton and visit us, and my mom was always busy, and we didn't want to come to Oxnard, so we would disappear. And he would fuss with my mom, and he would say, you know what, Barb, you know, these guys need to come up here to go to school. It's safer, it's quieter, you know, they're like little vampires, you know, you can't find them at night and they want to sleep all day. You know, if I get a hold of them, and it's not going to be that. So I come to Oxnard, and my interactions here were, you know, it was a different environment, a little bit more low key. I could actually ride my bike from north side of Oxnard to the beach in Wainimi and not have to worry about sets and things of that nature that you worry about in LA. And so I went to Ventura College, played football with Scott. Then I went to UCSB. And I always knew I wanted to work at the youth authority. And so when I worked in media relations in Santa Barbara for a few years, and then I went through the background check and all this other stuff to work at the California Youth Authority. And the sad and sobering reality of that is when I came out of the academy and I went to the youth authority, it was like a freaking family reunion. And that hurt my heart. And so one of the guys who I grew up with, his name was Reginald Chisholm. And he was a younger brother of an older brother who I used to always fight with. And he was in the youth authority when I got there. And when he got released, a couple of weeks later, he got killed. And so I would get calls from some people on the block. Hey, Nunu's in there, such and such is in there. And I'm like thinking to myself, like, man, like, when I was at UCSB and I would come home to the block and I said, hey, people would be like, man, where you been? And I said, oh, I'm at UCSB. And they said, is that a men's colony? Like, what is that? I said, no, it's a university, man. You know? And so people didn't know where I was for a few years. But then when I get to the youth authority, I'm getting calls like such and such is in there, or somebody's in there, look out for this person, look out for that person. But then as I kind of got over the emotion of that, I started to realize when we start talking about racism and systemic oppression, I was looking at it firsthand. Because a lot of people from my neighborhood in Compton were coming into jail. Mind you, this is the 90s. We're coming in droves because you have the crack epidemic, but our kids are being pushed in by plea bargains. They didn't even make it to court. They said, we're going to give you 20, 30 years, or we're going to prosecute you as a juvenile and give you life. You know, all this plea bargain stuff, and you don't have the money, and they tell you you're going to get 7 years versus you were going to do life. Okay, you're going to take the 7. And so I've seen so many of our people get railroaded. It was kind of disheartening. It was kind of hard for me to go to work. And then, you know, with the institutional games, the race games and all that stuff, it just didn't appeal to me. And when I left the youth authority to go and get my master's because I still knew I wanted to work with people, but in a different setting. right? And I think Scott was getting his master's at Northridge at the same time. So I would still see Scott in the peripherals. And people didn't believe that I was leaving, because the correctional peace officers, you make pretty decent money. And so I was there for probably about 2 years, and I said I was leaving, and the lieutenant didn't believe me. He was still giving me my shifts, because I didn't turn in a formal letter. Mind you, I was kind of young about how do you quit and all this stuff, but I knew I was going to grad school, and I knew I wasn't going to work at the youth authority anymore. One of the kids from my neighborhood on Locust Street in Compton, he was on my caseload, and I worked the evening shift, 2:30 to 10:30 at night, with Wednesdays and Thursdays off. That was hard, right? And anyway, so there was a guy on my caseload who was from my neighborhood, and there was some racial stuff going on the unit, and I came back, and he was in the hospital. And he got jumped by the Latinos. And I just knew, I was like, man, I like touching people, but I don't like touching them this way. And to go to jail every day to work, it just wasn't my cup of tea. So I went and got my master's, went back, worked at UCSB for a few years, started teaching personal development at Oxnard College, and then I eventually came there as a counselor, right? And so that's the path I chose to make that change. And so when I hear us talk about institutional racism, right, Dexter talked about his experience, right, with the prejudice of the kids. And he had a very solid, salient point, because those kids will be police officers, those kids will be doctors, those kids will be lawyers. And so those prejudices that they grow up with will ultimately influence our institutions. So the kids who were on the flip side at the youth authority, or the kids that was on my block when I was coming up, they don't impact policy. So now we're talking about prejudice versus racism and how it becomes institutionalized. And so when I hear Scott talk about, you know, the densely populated areas like Cuesta del Mar and Southside, you know, brown is definitely going to be the new black around here. And so if we don't really think about institutional racism and its impacts, we're going to be here, the iceberg that Mr. Nguyen said, there's going to be another name on the top, because we're complicit in looking at things from a framed context that we're saying, okay, police make up like 60% of the city budget. And I'm looking at what Scott is saying, and it's like, wow, man, we ask a lot of the officers, right? So to me, I'm looking at a department that's putting their hands on a dam that's ready to crack. But then socially and systematically, I say we need to invest more in social services, because we have officers being trained to be social service people. But we need true social service peoples, MSWs, people who are counseling. We have so many homeless people. We have so many people dealing with addictions. And he said it right there. That's a preponderance of some of the calls that the police deal with. And so systematically, I'm thinking to myself, well, if we only address that through law enforcement, then we only fuel the flame for creating a bigger need for the police budget to be bigger and bigger, because we're thinking in that frame of context like, hey, we need other officers to be trained in social services or MSWs, and we keep pushing it into protective services, which hasn't really addressed years of systemic biases and racism that goes on within that system, and the kid who called you a nigger, that's now a police officer. That probably, was an explorer, went to the academy, and Scott and I have talked, and we said, we need to have officers with degrees. We need to have officers with masters. We need to have officers who know about ethnic studies and anti-blackism. Because if you don't, we just keep perpetuating the same thing. So I had a couple of notes from my experience of dealing with the police. Scott said you have two interactions with the police that kind of set the tone for you. And my buddy Don Fields, he's gone now. We grew up together in Oxnard and Compton. And I was working at the Youth Authority. I was at the Robinson's May Mall. I thought I was doing the right thing, working a full-time job at the Youth Authority. Had my roommates and, just living life. And so Don and I go to the mall, and we're walking out, and I'm holding my bags, and then Don said, hey, the sheriff is looking at us. And I saw the sheriff from my peripherals. I said, no, he's not. So as soon as I get up to my car, the officer speeds over and tells us to get our hands against the car. Don, my boy, he's been on the other side of the law before, so he knew the protocol, right? So he puts his hands on the car, and I'm like shocked. So I turn around, and I still have my bags, and I said, well, what's the nature of the stop? What am I being stopped for? And then the officer just starts barking, get your hands against the car, get your hands against the car. And then I asked him another question, and he drew down on me. And then I said, okay, this is serious, So I put my hands against the car. He let me get my wallet. I put my wallet out, and I had my Youth Authority badge in there. Then he kind of changed up his conversation with me, and now I wanted to whoop his butt. Right? And so So when I got in the car and I was coming home, Don was mad at me. He said, man, you could have got us killed. And since we're in church, I'm going to say that's what he said. But he was like, man, you could have gotten us killed. And it never registered in my head that I could have I could have gotten myself killed. And that's the reality that we deal with. In dealing with law enforcement, dealing with police, dealing with prejudice, dealing with institutional racism. So in my perspective, I feel like it needs to be addressed. You can't mandate morality. You can't legislate ethics. Dexter said we need to have these conversations at home, and we do. But not only us. The black folks can't bear the burden. The Latino folks can't bear the burden. We need to have law enforcement bear the burden of having those discussions at home with their families. We need to have people in Camarillo and the surrounding communities and other people who are white have those conversations at their table. And obviously it hasn't been happening because we're almost at the same point that we were in the 60s and the 50s. And that's sad because we feel like we're moving to a certain degree. We have moved along. I don't think there are people showing up to, we were appalled by what we saw with Mr. Floyd. And maybe in the past people would have been clapping. And maybe there are some silent clappers. People was at home talking about, yeah. But for the most part, people were appalled. And not just black people. It was more than just black people who saw that and said, ooh, how does this happen? They're in shock. And then the black people are like, oh man, we ain't in shock. We mad. And some of us are sad and some of us are frustrated, but we're not shocked because we experience it at an exponential level. So you can have a person like Candace Owens that will spend her time discrediting Mr. Floyd, saying he's not a martyr, he's not a hero. And I said, okay, well, you know what? But I know one thing he was the wick that lit the powder keg to make people want to get up and address this, right? And so, and that's the thing, is like, how do we address this? You know, how do we deal with prejudice? How do we deal with institutional racism? How do we have a police force, but then also have other viable social institutions around and support us? You know, I was a peace officer. I went to the academy. I learned about restraints and all of jujitsu and getting up in the morning and making them dang runs and all that. But I felt like my lot in life and my goal to touch people was in the educational realm. And other people feel like they can help from other institutions within our social contract. I heard Trevor Williams say the social contract is breaking down in America, right? We want free trade market at the top. We want deregulation of businesses and finances at the top. But at the bottom, we want to regulate the poor till they can't be regulated anymore. And we need the help. We need the support. It's going to come from structural change. It's got to be structural change. And you can watch the news, and they'll say, well, it's the Antifa. I can't even pronounce the name of it. Antifa. Like, yeah, like they're instigating the riots, and they're causing all this. And I'm like, okay, it may be a few of those wingnuts running around, but the reality is, it's the system itself that's agitating the people. And so we're in a position where we can make that change. We can make it, I said, we can make it progressively and take our steps toward it. We can make it radically. Or if you wait long enough and you keep your head in the hole, it's going to be revolutionary. So the choice is ours. The choice is our institutions, but we got to address them. We got to address them and know that it's not an overnight thing. We can't just pass a budget from the city and say, ooh, okay, we're fine. We got to look at structural stuff. We got to look at data. South side of Oxnard, they had this one thing called the misery index. Does anybody hear that? This is state officials. I don't know why they call it that. That's so crass, right? But the south side of Oxnard was highest on the misery index, meaning that they had more than their densely populated area with the least amount of education and the least amount of family income. And that's the area where we have a heavy police presence. So if we don't address the other things on the misery index, we're going to forever have a police presence over there. Because we need to worry about education over there. We need to worry about housing over there. We need to worry about income level over there. Those are systemic things, right? So I don't even have nothing to do. It's indirectly connected to police brutality, but then it doesn't have anything to do with it directly. But we're neglecting it, and it's showing. It's showing in the rates of crime. If you have poor people, you're going to have crime. Duh. So then how do we rectify what Martin Luther King said, the war on poverty? He's gone. Poverty's still here. But we don't take it seriously, structurally. And so we had a cross-section of students who showed out for the Black Lives Matters. And I say, don't let your poster get old. Don't let this be oh, you remember in 2020 we was at the government center, but what did you do after that? Right? If Black Lives Matter with the poster, does Black Life matter in everyday concrete ways? Does it matter when you see a black person at school Does it matter when a black person in Oxnard tries to apply for a job? Does it matter when a black person is in contact with the police and they have fear? Right? So we got this big old overarching, mantra of Black Lives Matter, but I'm saying, does black life matter? Everyday black life. And so those are things that we have to struggle with as a society, and there's a lot of work left undone. There's a lot of work left undone. So I won't say any more. Thank you, guys. I know Jordan has time for Q&A, and give praise to Floyd, George Floyd, and I thank you, Minneapolis, for lighting the spark to get us here to think and take us into another realm of being a country. Thank you.
Okay. We will now like to open it up to Q&A. I have a few questions here already from people that DM'd me on Instagram, and I'll start with one from Anthony Scott. He said, one of the biggest issues with policing the community is the moment they stop community policing, which means cops on foot patrol. When that was going on, cops knew the people in the community. It's harder to mistreat people when you know them and their families. It's easier for the community to talk with an everyday police officer. I say that to ask this: why did that end, and when will it return? I believe that's directed to you, Chief Whitney.
Thank you, Jordan. Very good point, good question. I got hired in 1990, went through the academy, through field training, and you learn a certain way or what you think your job is as a police officer. And then in 1992, Chief Hurt opened up our first police storefront in the county. It was at Cooper and Hayes or near there, the Colonia neighborhood, and I was one of the officers selected to work that. So I saw firsthand what this person is saying, and it is also related to what I said earlier. When our community knows the police officers and vice versa, it completely changes the dynamic of the job. I tell our officers, if you ask, and I've done this on Cooper Road, asking moms and grandmas, which officers would you prefer? The one that chases the gang member over fences, recovers a gun, and catches this person out of your house, takes him away, and never says a word to you. Would you rather have that officer, or would you rather have the officer that walks by, talks to you, and asks you how things are going and what your concerns are? And everybody chooses the second officer. The reality, the short answer to your question is it ends up being budget cuts. We closed the storefront there in Colonia because of budget cuts. When you have to conserve your resources and the 911 calls are coming in and you have to send officers to 911 calls, it's just not as efficient if they're out walking a beat. And so that's the short answer. We saw it last year. We had 13 of our police officers, our neighborhood policing officers. They would be the ones that go to the neighborhood council meetings. They're the problem solvers. We had to send them back to patrol to save some money on overtime. So it ends up being a budget issue, Jordan.
Thank you. I have another from Denise. Do your senior officers believe race sensitivity training is necessary? And do they reflect this attitude to the rest of the department?
not sure what he means by senior officers. If they mean people of rank, I will say yes. The two assistant chiefs there, myself, believe in it wholeheartedly. Eric Stonsgaard and I were the ones that led the cultural proficiency efforts. I know Jason is the same way. If it's senior, if by senior you mean the ones that have the most tenure, believe so, but people don't always tell the chief exactly what they're thinking also, you know.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have one for Alex. This is from Destiny. Where can we find the itemized list of the $62.8 million that the police received from the state budget?
So our city budget is actually published on the city's website. So you can get all the detail there. And there's the budget proposal for this coming year is there, but also there's a dashboard with the current year. So all the information's there. But there's a component of that question that assumes that all that money comes from the state, and it doesn't. That's local money. Thank you.
Thank you for that. If anyone would like to speak in here today, please raise your hand. My team will pull you over and come over here to line up. Next person. Kingsley, come on.
How's everybody doing out there? All right. You don't have to respond. Honestly, I didn't have anything prepared to talk about, you know, like anything formulated questions or anything like that. I was kind of asked to come here and just kind of speak my mind because I guess some people that do know me, I guess, know some of the where my morals and values are at. So I'm not a guest speaker here, but I'm from Oxnard. I was raised in Oxnard. I know plenty of people from this neighborhood. I worked with the PAL program for about close to 15 years where I've coached football, basketball. I ran a hip hop program there where when I was younger, this is interesting because when I was younger and not that really conscious in terms of the way the world works when it comes to anti-blackness and the inequalities, the racial inequalities of the world, not just the United States, and to sit back and wonder why certain things are the way they are according to my black skin. And I used to work at this police activities league, and for some reason I used to always think that I was doing the right thing because I would sit back here and see, actually I used to see you too, Officer Witten, from time to time. I don't know if you remember seeing me, but I used to actually work under my boss named Terrell Harrison. He was, you know. So I used to sit back and I used to think, hey, you know, I'm doing the right thing, you know, helping these kids out. And it was this culture that was there because I used to work with some of the kids that used to have community service hours. And there was this certain type of culture that was there where we would perceive them as bad kids. I never really understood that because my life as a child, you know, I could have easily been one of those kids doing community service. I got lucky many times throughout my life to just, you know, not have run-ins with the cops where I could have been dead or shot. And then as a while, I started reading more books, running into people, you know, that became mentors and teaching me things about anti-blackness and actually that helped me to try to answer some of the questions I had internally that would really drive me insane. And I sit here and I just gotta be honest, man. I was sitting here and listening to you guys and I told myself, I was like, dude, when I come here, I hope it doesn't turn out to be this thing where we got an officer in full uniform with a gun. You look around here, we got chief of police here, and his whole spiel, he's telling us that he didn't really understand what institutional racism was till he was 40 years old. So what does that tell you about the system that's policing us? I mean, why does the way it's said, it's almost as if we should give you a pass for that of misunderstanding. And that's why I think what the whole existence of policing needs to be questioned is the foundation of what it's built on. It's built on racial inequalities. It's built on anti-blackness, systematic oppression. You know, it stems strictly from slave patrolling. And until we address those things, we could talk about the Martin Luther Kings and all this stuff here, but we don't address those foundational things that you guys, those creeds that you guys live by and you guys protect it. I mean, even when you guys see your own, you know, kill an innocent black man right there in broad daylight. And it really trips me out that now that because he's the chief, we as the people have to sit here and listen to this and actually go, you know what? You're right. Some of you guys make some mistakes. But in this type of life that you guys choose to be quote unquote peacemakers, those type of mistakes really should be non-existent, you know? And it's very strange to me that we sit here in this oppression from the plantations to now, and we still have this thing that eats us up inside that once when a white man talks with power, we sit back and we listen. And sometimes we even forget what really happened to George Floyd out there in the broad daylight streets because he's talking now. And I really don't understand that because right now I feel like thanks for giving me the information, but that wasn't good enough for the city manager as well. The way I look at this is when you guys look at the gangbangers in the streets, you guys don't pinpoint and say, well, you know, that guy on the street, man, yeah, he's part of a gang, but he's actually a good dude. So I'm gonna give him the benefit of the doubt. You know, you guys categorize everybody in the same lump category. You guys do something, choke a man out in broad daylight for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and they're all of a sudden, not all of you guys are bad, only a few. You know, and I really don't understand that. You know, then you got somebody coming representing as a cousin, but he's also a former law, enforcement. So it's like, who's really talking here? You know, like, I personally believe that cops, you guys are into way too much when it comes to the city as far as being involved in everything. I do believe that a lot of the shootings that you do see, most of them, a large percentage of them could have really been dealt with mental, what do you call it, where you didn't need a cop. You needed somebody with a badge or a gun or anybody to show up. I mean, you know, so we've been trained since children to kind of, something happens, go call the police. Something happens, go call 911. So you forget everything what happens in your community. Everybody that you should be growing to love to trust when these minor situations happen. You see somebody homeless, you go call the police. You know, you don't want to go see what's going on, you just go call the police. Anything that freaks you out. You know, so we've taken on the same mindset as the same mindset as the oppressors. But we're the ones that's still getting oppressed, but we still feel that we need to call the police. I really, there's a lot of questions that I really don't understand why we sit back and now all of a sudden we here, and I thought this was supposed to be a sold-out event, there's empty seats here, and things like that. And it is clearly because I'm pretty sure people know, why am I going to come here? I mean, really, I ask myself. I sit here and heard the city manager.
Kingsley.
What?
I don't mean to interrupt you, I'm sorry, but due to time.
That's fine.
That is your time.
That's fine. Like I said, I didn't write anything, and I really wasn't going to come here to draw out some crazy points to you guys because I wasn't prepared for that. But what I don't understand is that this is really like a slap in the face to the people because you guys are not saying anything in terms of what you're doing bad and what you guys need to do. Instead, it goes into this is the reasons why we do what we do, and every now and then these mess-ups happen. What can we do, guys, to make it better? I don't really, I don't understand that. I mean, honestly, I really do think that you cops are really just turning your badges and really think to yourself, what's the foundation of this stuff built on? This is not peacemaking.
I appreciate you. We have to move on, though.
Well, that's fine. That's totally fine. Thank you guys for your little time that it was. I appreciate it.
Thank you. please keep it to a question as well. This is Q&A. So if you have a question, go ahead and ask.
I have like more than a question. I prepared like a 5-minute long thing.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I need to bring this down. So my name's Irene Valencia. I'm a resident here of Oxnard. I've lived here my entire life. I've been involved with different movements of social justice, from environmental, farm worker rights, and I've always been deeply moved by the Black Lives Matter movement, and having friends and just seeing their experience of the oppression that they've gone through, you know, even though they've made everything that they can in their hands to, you know, move past the barriers of racial injustices. And there's something that has sparked in me recently that I've just discovered is like, holy shit, like this is real. I know, you know, a few Black men that are veterans of our country, and they only feel safe when they're wearing that fucking uniform. As soon as they take it off, there's no protection for them. Law enforcement, I know that you guys are exposed to a lot of violence while you're wearing your uniform and you have a badge, but you take that off and you're good. For these Black men that serve our country, they don't get that privilege. And so I'm standing here today to stand up for them and the beautiful Black women that have raised these children, and the anxiety that they've dealt with day in and day out, wondering if their kids are gonna come home. Being in an interracial relationship now, I'm fucking afraid of thinking of having a Black baby and thinking if he's gonna be safe. I have a lot of anger. I am educated. I know I don't sound like it, and my sister always tells me when you let your anger take over, you lose the message and you lose the people. But I also feel like if you don't have passion, then there's no message. And I did have something prepared, but you come up here and it's like really hot now, so I have to take my jacket off. You know, I have my bachelor's in psychology. I have my master's in social work. I've counted up 3,000 hours to be able to submit my documents to become a licensed clinical social worker. Prior to that, I had to do, you know, obviously my master's program for 3 years. I interned anywhere from 600 to 700 hours to be licensed. After that, I have to renew my license every year to be able to practice my field of psychotherapy with children at the school level. That's my expertise. And law officers don't have that responsibility of having to get recertified as police officers. I don't know what their mental capacity is to be able to deal with the trauma that they're experiencing in the community. You know, I was going through the district attorney's report of the shooting of Megan Hockaday. In the report, it shared that her husband earlier, prior to the 911 call, was able to successfully disarm her from the knife while she was pointing it at him. However, Officer Garcia shot at her within 20 seconds. He had all protective gear, CIT training. I don't understand how he wasn't able to use his critical thinking skills to make that decision of disarming her the way that her husband had done so previously. And I know that, you know, there's a lot of trauma that goes into being in law enforcement, and that's why I think my message here to Chief Whitney is what is being done to support law enforcement from any PTSD symptoms that could be affecting the way that they're responding to the community, and how can you collaborate with partner mental health agencies in the community to make sure that we're bringing about real change, so that they're not reacting and responding appropriately to the community, because that's how you build relationships, that's how you maintain the trust from the community. So I'm coming at it from a mental health standpoint, and also the man that spoke previously, I agree. I feel like, you know, I think the intention was to give people of color the opportunity to have a voice and speak up on what the true concerns are. I didn't appreciate that there was just this, like, we're good, we're better than other cities, it kind of doesn't validate the hurt of the community and the frustration and the anger and the fear. So I think, going forward, if, we continue to have these conversations, it would be helpful if you took some ownership over a lot of the concerns that are coming up for the community so that we can really affect change and make it lasting. Thank you.
Thank you. Before you go, I have one quick online question. What is going to change in the academy? Are the police officers going to be going through a rigorous training program from here on out?
Yeah, so our officers, we give them the best training that we have available. There would be no other, there's no motivation to do anything than give them the best training that's available. We have a regional academy. It's run out of Camarillo Airport through Ventura County. I had mentioned the academy is, I believe, 5 months or 6 months. Then we have about 4 or 5 months of field training after that. There are certain state mandates. The state has requirements in the academy. It takes up most of the academy. If we were going to add something, which I'm a proponent of adding, I mentioned it in my comments, if we were going to add something, that would have to be something that was in partnership with the other agencies in the county, or we would do post-academy training.
Thank you. You're up, sir.
So I hope everyone can hear me, and I'm going to try to ask a question, I'll bet a statement behind it. My name's Greg Runyon. I'm a local pastor. I also am a consultant with CFS, working with families that are in danger of losing their kids or have already lost them because of criminality or drugs, things like that. But I also come from a experience as somebody who looks the way I look. I've also spent 10 years in prison, and I just want to preface what I'm going to ask by making 2 statements. One, my life was particularly and profoundly changed by a black man that was in prison for manslaughter. I was at CRC. We were forced to bunk with mixed race, and Neil had the bunk below me, and Neil was big, man. He was like 6'7", 320 pounds, and he'd been hit by a bullet, and he had a little bit of a limp. But one day I was across the yard, and tensions were very high, and it was going to jump off between the whites and the blacks. Neil escorted me back to the place where I was now residing in the prison yard because I had changed bunks. But he walked me all that way to make sure that I wasn't jumped. He stepped out from what his peers expected him to do to assist me, not because of the color of my skin, but because of my heart. We were friends. Fast forward to almost 20 years ago when I was being arrested again. And I had been laser sighted by officers, and I don't have time to go into that story, but my life was profoundly changed by a police officer that took the time to drive me not straight to jail, but he drove me around another way to tell me that I didn't have to lose my wife if I would make some changes in my life. He told me I should give my life to Jesus Christ, and I did. That's why one of the reasons I'm a pastor today. He also was an African-American officer. I think the challenge that I have today, and I'm going to be frank and say it, I heard a couple of people say it. I don't know your pain as black folks. I can feel it. I can sense it. I have not walked it. And it's very hollow for me to say, I'm sorry. But I wanted to say to Dexter, and I told him this, he talked about being the only black coach there, and I told him this. He was the right coach. It didn't matter what his skin color was, it mattered what his heart was, and he was the right coach. And I think my hope in everything we're here today is what are we going to do moving forward? So I hope I don't ask this the wrong way, because I know sometimes when we ask a question like this, I'm not trying to turn anything around, but I think there has to be a dialogue where people are willing to sit, to listen, and then to change. And so whoever wants to tackle this, and Chief, maybe we need to start with you. What is the department willing to do specifically in relation to the Black community to try and improve those relationships? And then I'd be interested to know from the 3 Black folks that are up here, what are you guys willing to do to help partner this dialogue and this thing that has to move forward? Because if all we do is talk, we're going to get what we've always got, and that's just talk. So thank you.
Thank you for saying that, and everyone who came up and spoke before. Some of the things that I hear that are being frustrated with is there are things that are on these slides that you're asking questions about that had numbers and things that are attached to them. So what I don't want people to forget is that this platform was set up so that there could be some frustration let out, but I don't want y'all to forget that we put an ask on the table from me in the beginning. So there is going to be a follow-up conversation and something to deliver to the community. So we purposely did not just have this just for people can talk. Like, there's something coming out of it. There's something that the police, the Oxnard PD, have to put on paper for us to deliver to you in regards to what our ask was in regards to the SB 1421. So that's the ask. So don't ever feel like you came here and there's not something going to happen afterwards. So yes, to your question, there is follow-up, and that is what we're actually going to be doing.
Greg, thank you for the question. I shared some of my story because I'm being honest, it is what it is. I went through the public schools, I went through college, the academy. That's the way it was when I went through. Every single person we hire, if I say we're trying to hire people from within the community, everybody we bring on mirrors. The thing is, not only do we want diversity in the community, but the people we bring, from my perspective, it's the best that our community has to offer. So we're hiring people, if they come in with biases, those are the biases that exist in our community. And we all inherit. When I came onto the department, I inherited the department the way it was. Every one of us that works for a government agency, probably any organization, owns some of this. City manager touched on that. I talked about making changes from within and then from outside. As a chief, I have very limited input on either federal, state. I have some input on the local changes. But in my 30 years in the department, I've done the best I could to make positive change from within the department. I don't know how you could ask for anything else. So, thank you.
We have time for about 2 more questions. We have something that we have to do to follow up after. So,
good afternoon. Can you hear me? I'm going to talk real fast and loud because I want to thank Dexter, first of all, for getting me here. My name is Patricia Trude. I'm originally from Beaumont, Texas. I was born in 1955. That was the year that Emmett Till was murdered. That was the year that Oh, Tutti Frutti came out. What's his name that sang that? That just died? Little Richard. Okay. I was born in one of the most segregated states in this union. And I grew up learning about all of this and witnessing it because my mother, the family historian, told me about the KKK and told me about her two brothers that had to have the talk from my grandmother, don't let the sun go down and catch you out in the woods. Okay? Even to this day, when I go back for family reunions, black people mysteriously disappear, and 1 or 2 years later, they find their remains. This is still going on. Now, all due respect to you, Chief, and I want to meet you and tell you my name, because one of my nephews works on the Oxnard PD. His father and my husband were partners in the CHP. Okay, when I was growing up, I went to Wainimi High School. I graduated in 1973. This is when Black Studies was starting all over the college campuses and high school campuses. I was real militant. I wanted to be Angela Davis so bad. I wanted to be a Black Panther because all cops to me were pigs. I'm just being real. Because growing up in the South, I saw what happened. I saw people killed. There was black water fountains, white water fountains. Even you couldn't go to the laundromat. They had a black one and a white one. As kids, the public swimming pool, we got in the pool one time. And then after that, the water was drained and the pool was cleaned because they didn't want any of our black cooties, I guess. So let me tell you, when I saw this video of Mr. George Floyd, 8 minutes and 46 seconds, that was like my brother. That was like my father. That was like my cousin. I've lost 3 male cousins to gang violence in Compton, Linwood, and Long Beach, killed in the street like dogs, and none of them were affiliated with gangs. I'm tired of black people losing their lives. These are human beings. And this is what I have to say about the police. It regards that man that got up and spoke first. Look, police are human beings like anybody else. When I used to work at Courts Trading Post, and this was, I ain't gonna say how many years ago, I finally got to understand police people because we used to have security that worked there that were sheriffs. So I talked to them. They have families, they have kids, they have dreams for their families and their kids. But if you don't know your history of the United States of America, if you don't know that we hang men, cut off their penises and their testicles, put it in their mouth and burn them while people ate popcorn and told jokes, if you don't know that, if you don't know that illegal marriages were illegal between different type of colors of skin. Just yesterday, June the 12th, it was called Loving Day. That's the couple that fought to get interracial marriages approved. Okay, I'm coming to a head now. The reason I say this is because I told you how militant I was growing up. All cops were pigs. Guess what? I wound up marrying one. Oh yeah, how real. You know why? Because true love finds you. You don't find love. And love has no color. And my husband's white. He's a former highway patrol. But I ripped him up one side and down the other like 2 days ago. I had to apologize before we went to bed. Because unless your skin is the color of mine, or you're red or you're yellow, you don't fucking understand. You don't. And like that young man was talking about with the police, this is built, the police department, as far as I'm concerned, is built on racism. Because where I come from, cops would pull you over, sometimes you disappear, sometimes you wind up getting beat up. You take that into your soul and you pass it on to the next generation. So there's a lot of bad, ill feelings. And my advice for the training of the police department, you need to have a serious, in-depth knowledge and teaching of the history of the United States. So when you go out there and patrol and you come across a black face or a brown face or a red face or yellow face, you have some understanding about their culture and what they've been through. You might have a little more sensitivity about what you do. And there's too much excessive force, and I see it, I know it. You don't have to always be so rough, okay? I've seen people killed because the police were in fear of their life. When somebody's running from them, shooting them in the back, what kind of shit is that? All right? Now, I respect you, Chief, and I'm just saying this. I want to work in this community. I was born in Texas, in segregation. I've lived all over the world. And I'm going to tell you, the United States of America, as far as I'm concerned, still the best country. But it's never going to be as great as it can be until we dig this cancer out of our body, this cancer of hate, this cancer of racism, this cancer of disliking somebody because of the color of their skin. It's not going to be great, y'all. And you can't wait on Trump. You can't wait on the government. It's got to come from us, grassroots. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much. I hope you're coming with the question.
I guarantee it. My name is Kyle Garza. I've grown up in Ventura County. I've lived in Oxnard. When my wife and I were married 5 years ago, we lived in Somis, Camarillo, and now I'm a high school English teacher out in Westlake. I'm heavily involved in these kind of conversations with my students, both obviously online right now, as it has to be, and as it will be in the fall semester as well. So one of the questions I have directed primarily to the Chief today has to do with police unions. Police unions are coming under heavy fire right now, being labeled widely as a harmful system that protects bad apples. So there's a few interconnected questions that I have on the subject of police unions. What is the role of police unions today? And can we part with them systemically if research demonstrates that they generate more harm than good? And what do officers stand to lose if police unions become a thing of the past? I don't ask this as an aggressor. I ask this as a private citizen who's just looking for information to disseminate within the community.
Sure. Police unions, their primary purpose is wages and working conditions. They're also clearly going to advocate for their members, and they're going to advocate as much as they can within the law of California. And California has a lot of protections and rights for police unions.
So can you answer especially that last question though? What do police officers stand to lose if it becomes a thing of the past? Again, if the research comes out, especially prominently in the years to come, that they are creating more harm than good.
I'm not quite sure what you mean by lose the unions. I don't see that as like a possibility within California with the bargaining rights and everything. I don't see that as a possibility. I do see the potential for the state to change some of the laws as far as personnel records, the ability to police departments, to hire and mostly, I think where you're getting at is discipline employees. But just from the perspective of doing away with the unions, I do not see that in the, the near future. I do see, like I said, the potential to change some of the laws, some of the rights that they have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This will be our last question.
Hi, I feel that some of the things I wanted to mention, questions, been kind of addressed, but as a Black woman, with Black children, son and daughter, how can you assure me that if they're pulled over by the police, that they will not be treated with brutality because of being Black? Along with that, I also wanted to say, because also my daughter, I have a daughter, 2 daughters that were pulled over, and she works for a surgery center, and they were treated, their rights were violated. They were, she was asked for her driver's license, her car insurance, and registration, and after giving that to the police officer, they still wanted her out of the car to search the car, so her rights were violated. And what is the plan to make sure that Black people, when they are pulled over, that they will not be treated unjustly? With that, lastly, I would like to share and say that that Christ, for the name of Jesus Christ, that he died for the sins of the world. He is not partial, that that red, yellow, black, and white, we are all precious in his sight, that partiality and racism, it has to stop. I've served in this community with a couple of the nonprofit organizations. I'm a small business owner, and as a Black woman, I am concerned of my safety if I get pulled over. And we just need to love our neighbor as ourselves, and the best way we can know to do that is follow the role model of Jesus Christ with his love.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Appreciate it. I mentioned earlier, I think one of the best things we can do is have relationships with our Black community. If you feel confident in me, if you feel confident in the bosses, if you feel confident, if you know who the officers are, and if there is a problem, you're more likely to come forward. If we know of something, we're better able to address it. We do have body-worn cameras, so when a complaint comes in, when we hear about it, we're able to look at those cameras and get good information very quickly on those. So I think it's relationships, and then we have to prove that we are accountable to you. Thank you.
Okay, one last question, really quick.
Yeah. Hi. Earlier, I thought you said the city of Oxnard 60% for the police, and we were asking a lot. I think it's the other way around. But the thing, real quick, for about Minnesota and what happened, like you were saying, the body cameras and stuff, that was caught on tape. We saw that, you know what I mean? And you still have people not doing anything because it's not just the police, you know. Also, what happened with the DA? How come they weren't going to prosecute him at first? The medical examiner, initially he said what? Underlying conditions. I mean, come on, let's get serious. I mean, there is a problem, and it's not just the cops. But it is the cops, but it's also everything that goes after that and everything that comes before that. And also, last thing, you'll hear people tell you Black Lives Matter because they saw that life being taken on that day. If they also mention some junk being taken at CVS or some garbage being taken at Target, they're BSing you with that Black Lives Matter stuff. They're giving you lip service. Thanks.
So I want to thank Calvary Church for hosting us. It really helped bring something to the table that we're going to continue to work on. And I want to thank everyone who actually got a ticket and showed up, because there are some empty seats here, and I'm a little pissed at that because there are people who we turned down who wanted to be here, and someone has a ticket and didn't come for whatever reason that is. but this was important for the community and important for us. And like I say, we have an ask on the table. So we feel good about Chief Whitney being here and the city manager, Alex, being here, because they now know what our ask is in front of the community. So that part we're going to continue to work on. And I knew it was going to get a little testy. It was a little more calm because we're in a church. I know it could have got a little more out of hand with some speaking than if it had been somewhere else. But at this point, in for knowing that those feelings were going to happen, I'm a person who always try to look out for the community and are just other people. And this time is no different. So I reached out to some good people over at the Embassy Suites, and they were going to be a sponsor on a festival that we were putting together to help the city of Oxnard with their homeless before all this happened and it got canceled. So those red tickets, you may want to pull them out right now. We're going to do a raffle real quick. So what we're raffling off is a one-night King Suite at the Embassy Suites in Oxnard. We're doing 3 of those, by the way. I knew that would feel better. So the first one is ticket number 762109. And you have to be present to win. So if they're not here, we're going to go to another ticket. So I repeat that, 762109. Not here?
Back there.
We got a winner?
Come get it.
All right, come on up.
One of my team members right there. She came and got the ticket, though. That's okay.
What's your name? Let me check this, Peter. Hold on. I know we in church, but we still gonna check these numbers. It's a match. Congratulate her. Next one. 762026. 762026. No one has it? We'll pull another ticket. She must have been on social media. 762026. All right. Next ticket, 762021.
Yes.
762021.
Oh. Tamar Lee.
Hey, well, you know what? We're going to switch this guy of picking tickets. We're going to let somebody else pull these. Which one is that? I'm going to give mine to somebody. We have a match. Are you going to give that to somebody right now? Do you want me to give this to you and you're going to gift it right now, or are you going to gift it later?
No, I'll give it to, it was supposed to be for Coach Moon. So, Coach Moon, come up here. Him and his wife deserve it anyway.
Okay, hold on. Here you go, sir. Congratulations, Coach Moon. All right, we got one more. Oh, I'm not pulling. Nobody's going to blame me for nothing.
Movies has gum on it.
762025. 762025. 025. Guess we go to another ticket. 762054. Well, I know you're a pastor, but we're going to check these numbers. It's a match. Here you go. Once again, I want to thank you guys for coming. Thank you for sharing your voices. We really appreciate it, and thank you for staying a little bit over. I know we went over, but we had some people that had some things that they wanted to say, and we tried to get them in and be as respectful as possible. I'm going to turn it back over to Jordan if he has anything else to say other than that. Thank you, guys.
Yes, I just want to thank everyone for coming out. If you need to reach me at all, please hit me on my Instagram at psychward35. You can DM me for questions, especially when we're going to have to continue this about that ask. So we're going to follow up with that as well. I want to say thank you to my team members for helping out, and thank you to the Church of Calvary for letting us have the talk here. Thank you.